call Chris Foy.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. I know at home people listening to this debate at the committee stages of the Maori television Te Ara Tuku Whakata Irirangi Māori Amendment Bill, their eyes may be glazing over because we're talking about spectrum. Not necessarily in particular reference to my colleague, but because we are speaking about spectrum, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But because we're talking about spectrum, sometimes that, excuse the pun, goes over the head of most New Zealanders. But what is important here is that because we're having what is called the DSO, the digital switchover, on the 1st of December, I believe, an analogue frequency that was allocated to Māori TV under this bill will be allocated to another organisation called Te Pūtahi Paho. And it will be that organisation that essentially gets to utilise that old analogue spectrum. Now, where it becomes important about that spectrum is that it can actually be transformed into a digital spectrum. And in that spectrum, there's the ability for 8 digital TV stations to be carried. So one old spectrum becomes a new digital spectrum in which you can broadcast 8 TV stations for. Now, why is this important? Because in the future, if someone wants to start up a television station, if MTS had that, they would have the ability to lease out one of those 8 stations to make some money off it. But because there's been a transfer of that spectrum from MTS to Pūtahi Paho, it's taking away a potential revenue gathering scheme plan for MTS. And we've heard from my colleagues about the importance of making sure that the MTS has increased revenue. I think my colleague Claire Curran just made the point in her previous speech, and Anaya Mahuta made a reference to that in her second reading speech. So the question that I want to ask to the Minister and the Chair at the moment is why? And how will the proceeds of Pūtahi Paho's management of that spectrum benefit MTS, who was foregoing the right to own that spectrum? So if we can answer those questions, that will be very useful, because I think MTS would feel a little bit hard done by that it had this asset that was no longer going to be used, but could be used in a different way to make some revenue, to host other broadcasters, but that has now been taken off them. So to the Minister and the Chair, and this specifically refers to section 4.2c and CA about the spectrum management rights, how is it going to be utilised by Pūtahi Paho? How will the funds from that, if they make any money from it, go to MTS or not? And why specifically has that spectrum management right been transferred from MTS to Pūtahi Paho and not stayed with MTS? I don't know if there is a decent enough answer, Mr Chair, and I guess it goes to show that there is no real overarching vision from the government around spectrum use. Because we've seen it in 4G. They've just announced, and I think my colleague has put a press release out today about their intentions to sell off the 4G network, which has just become available. And instead of being able to, ring-fence some of that 4G spectrum or think of other uses where it can be utilised, it just says we're going to flog them all off. And as Claire Curran mentioned, and I think in her second reading speech, very recently Sky TV said, we're going to give 4 packets of this analogue spectrum back. So 4 times 8, because of the theory I said before, up to 32 television stations could be broadcast on the 4 packets of spectrum that Sky has just handed back to the government. And as of yet, we have had no word from the government as to what it intends to do with that. Now, just to give those at home an understanding of what these frequencies are worth, one of those packets recently sold at the auction that the government held at about $1.7 million. Am I right here? Yes, roughly $1.7 million. So these are resources that have got some cost. Obviously, in the future, as digital technology gets better, may actually be able to hold more transmission capability. So if people want to start television stations here in New Zealand, these are the kind of things that they're going to need to broadcast. So they will have some future value. Mr Chair?
Chris Farfoy.
So I would like to see an overarching strategy from this government. I'm not expecting one, about how it manages the spectrum that has just become available to it from Sky and the spectrum in the 4G sphere, which my colleague Claire Curran has already mentioned today, about how it sees best fit not just to hawk them off to the highest bidder, but to say, OK, if we've got 4 packets that have just come back from Sky TV, do we ring-fence some of that for any public broadcasting future? Because it's, and we've announced this today, that we think the government should ring-fence one of those packets that have just been given to them, one packet of analogue which can be transferred into 8 television stations at this moment, to make sure that that is protected for any future public broadcasting. Because if the government sells those 4 packets off to the highest bidder, they're all gone. So if any future government that is actually committed to public broadcasting, like on this side of the House, wants to start a public broadcaster up, there will be some spectrum available for us to do that. But what I fear will happen, and they've gone quiet, so this is probably what is going to happen, is that those 4 packets will just be hawked off to the highest bidder. So when it comes to time for this side of the House to say, we want to start up a public broadcaster, there'll be 0 spectrum available to us, so we're probably going to have to go back, cap in hand, to whoever bought them and say, we need some of it back. Now, if I had bought that spectrum, I would say, well, things have changed. You really want to do this, so you're going to have to buy it at a much higher price. Well, in the long run, that is bad for the taxpayer, because not only do we have to pay more for the spectrum, we could have held on to it and ring-fenced it so that we had the ability to not just start 1, but also have 7 more television networks there on that spectrum. So, to the government, I'll pose this challenge, and maybe the Minister or the Chair would like to see how this works for the MTS as well. This government has the ability now to ring-fence spectrum, to manage spectrum in a responsible manner for state broadcasting. You probably only get to sell it once, or lease it once every 20 years. So what they do now is very important. They can either hawk it off, and they've got a track record for that, or they can say, this is important stuff right now. We might be able to sell some of it, but this is going to be saved for any future government. They might want to do it. Again, I'm not expecting it, for public broadcasting. So that is another question that I might pose to the Chair around spectrum, because this management arrangement in the bill seems a little bit strange to me. And again, I guess it's a little bit symptomatic of a government that doesn't have an overarching plan in terms of when it comes to spectrum. It's very important. People at home are actually watching Parliament TV now on spectrum. So if they want to see any future public broadcasting stations, there's going to have to be spectrum there available for it. So this government needs to make a pretty hard decision. Do we care about public broadcasting to ring-fence some spectrum or not? And I think in this bill around the way that the spectrum from MTS changing the ownership or management rights to Te Pūtahi Pauho shows the kind of attitude, excuse me, Mr Chair, that this government has the spectrum. They don't really care. Well, they should care, because this future Labor government will be committed to public broadcasting, and we do want to make sure that there's spectrum available to it. If the current government doesn't care about public broadcasting, it will just sell that spectrum, and we'll know the commitment from that government to public broadcasting. So it will all be down to a decision that will be made very soon about whether they sell it or keep it. And if they sell it, and you know this government doesn't care about public broadcasting, and if they keep it, well, they've proved the critics wrong. I would ask that maybe that the chair of the Maori Affairs Select Committee could put a bit of pressure on the government and take a call and say he agrees with me, because the success of Maori television could be augmented by them having another channel. But we don't know how that's going to happen, because they're no longer in charge of the frequencies that they're going to be going out on. That now goes to, no, not them, Te Pūtahi Pauho. So they can't manage any further growth without having to go through this other organisation who may say, we don't care about you having another channel, we're going to lease out the rest of the spectrum just to make money. So a question, and this is a serious question, if there is money to be made out of the spare spectrum, what's it going to be used for? I would prefer that it goes back into the culture, but that question has not been answered.
The Honourable Shane Jones.
Tēnā koe.